there, everyone. In this session, I want to introduce you to Captain Brian Sims from Delta Airlines and revisit what I consider one of the most important real-world validations of effective upset prevention and recovery training. This is not theory, this is operational data. Over 5 years and 5 million flights, Delta demonstrated a 50% reduction in precursor upset conditions through a properly implemented UPRT program. That level of performance arguably represents an unprecedented shift in aviation safety, directly addressing loss of control in flight, the industry's leading fatal risk like never before. Our team has been honored to support Delta over many years in building this capability through an integrated, aligned Stage 4, every pilot in control solution standard approach focused on performance in the field, not merely compliance. Let's watch Brian deliver what I consider to be a true masterclass in how data, training, and operational integration come together to reduce risk at scale. The upcoming segment with Brian is 30 minutes long and well worth your time to watch every second.
Well, thank you, Randy and Otter and BJ, for that very generous introduction. And thank you to all of you who are joining us this morning. I'm sorry I can't be with you live, but I'm actually in Southeast Asia this morning, presenting UPRT to a group of missionary bush pilots that I grew up flying with. And so as much as I'm excited to be home, I'm also excited to be with you today and using this technology to share UPRT on multiple continents at the same time. For those of you who may have heard me speak at the UPRT Global Summit in May, some of this information will be familiar to you, but I'm going to approach it a little bit differently today. And specifically from the standpoint of risk mitigation and how we mitigate those risks here at Delta, and hopefully how you can do something similar in your operation. So the topics that I want to go through today are, first of all, where is the risk? How do you identify that risk in your operation? Once you do, taking a look at the trend analysis, and I'm going to share some examples of how we've done that at Delta and how effective UPRT has been at Delta Airlines. We're going to look at a topic that I think is really important right now in the industry, and that is the relationship between aircraft upsets and automation and overdependence on automation. We're going to talk a little bit about threat mitigation, and then finally some tools for improvement and how we are looking ahead at Delta and hopefully using these tools to improve safety. Okay, so the first thing that I want to discuss this morning is risk management. I think it is absolutely essential in any operation to identify where your risks are. And fortunately, air travel is one of the safest modes of transportation in the world. But unfortunately, we have quite a history of accidents in the industry, specifically related to loss of control. And you obviously, as a worldwide loss of control UPRT audience, are familiar with those statistics. But when we're looking at risk management at Delta, we first start there and we look at the accidents that have occurred in the industry and say, how did that happen and how could we prevent that from ever happening here in our operation? Secondly, we look at internal incidents and approach it in a very similar way. No operation is perfect. We work in a very dynamic world of aviation. Weather's changing, aircraft are changing, people are changing. And so we try to identify the causal factors to the incidents and figure out how we could prevent that. We spend a lot of time looking at FOQA data, which comes out of the flight data recorders on the aircraft. Anytime we have an exceedance, that shows up and we review that data. And then we kind of color that picture with the ASAP reports. And these are internal reports that our pilots provide to the operation. And it's all de-identified, but they explain to us what it was that occurred. And we read those and we help understand what had occurred on the aircraft for them and how to prevent that in the future. And then where I come in and my team comes in is as a subject matter expert. Delta requires that at all times we have a minimum of 2 subject matter experts on every single fleet. And those subject matter experts are instructors on our fleet, but they're also specifically trained by APS to deliver UPRT to the rest of our instructors, and then those line instructors deliver it to the line pilots. And so those are kind of the layers that we go through as we're initially approaching the topic of risk management. Moving on from there and kind of building on that subject matter expert idea, is it's absolutely essential that we deliver high quality training to our pilots. And so one of the things that we do when we're delivering that training is we share the data with our crews. And we share that FOQA data, we share that ASAP data, we share the incident reports with our crews so that we can understand how a really good, highly qualified crew in a fully capable airplane working in a very controlled system like the National Airspace System could reach a point of an upset or ultimately a loss of control. We want to know how that happened, and so we share that with our crews. We then elevate that with an academic understanding. This may be connected to the aircraft systems, it may be related to the aerodynamics, but we want to understand from an academic perspective how that upset occurred. And then we train that to proficiency. First, how to avoid it, but then if you've done everything to avoid it and you still encounter an upset, we want to make sure that our pilots are proficiently able to recover from any upset that they may encounter. If you've heard me speak in the past, I think it's really important in aviation and in any training environment that we remember that there are 4 levels of learning. So at the very base level is rote memory. We have understanding, application, and correlation. And so building on that training, we want to make sure that our pilots are able to apply that training in the simulator and then correlate that simulator training or on-aircraft training when they go to the line and encounter the very dynamic environment that they're encountering on the line. So at Delta, anytime that we are briefing a phase of the operation, whether it's takeoff, approach, landing, go around, whatever it is, we brief the plan. But then at the end of that briefing, we always identify what the highest threat is that we're going to encounter in that particular phase of the operation. And then we brief a mitigation strategy. So we always have a plan if things don't go according to plan. And we fly like we plan. Again, it's a dynamic environment, and sometimes that plan changes. And so this is where flight path monitoring comes in. It's absolutely essential that both pilots monitor the flight path at all times. And if the flight path deviates, then we call that out to one another and we review the plan and we adjust as necessary. All right, I want to move on and share some of the data with you through trend analysis. And I do want to take an opportunity here to commend Delta. They have been very much at the forefront of training UPRT and tracking the data and identifying where the threats are. And UPRT has absolutely been effective at Delta Airlines. And the data that I'm going to share with you today, it's all de-identified, all the raw numbers have been removed. So everything that you're seeing is on a rate basis. And I'm sharing it only with you in the name of safety, because I want you to understand where we've come as an airline and the effectiveness of UPRT in our operation, and hopefully how it can be effective in your operation. So in 2018, we began tracking the upset data and the exceedances online at Delta Airlines. And in 2018, our rate of exceedance per 10,000 flights was in the neighborhood of 2.6 per 10,000 flights. At the fourth quarter of last year, so 5 years since we began tracking this data, that rate had dropped from 2.6 per 10,000 to 1.3 per 10,000. So almost exactly a 50% reduction in the rate of exceedances at Delta. And that is over 5 years and 5 million flights worth of data. Moving on from there, we drill down into each of the specific upsets that occurred. And as you can see there, the highest number of events that we've seen online have actually been in the over pitch, in the high pitch arena. We track high pitch, low pitch, and high bank. And I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about some of those events. But the high pitch, specifically on the 757, has been the leading upset parameter that gets exceeded. This is the stall warning data, and this particular chart that you're looking at here, I realize it's a bit of an eye chart, but this is only for the Boeing aircraft. I'm going to show you the alpha floor data on the Airbus aircraft in just a minute here. But this was a bit of a surprise. That red line there represents the 767 fleet at Delta, and that fleet has been head and shoulders above all the other fleets in stall warnings. And I'm going to talk specifically about where those events occurred, because they, by and large, occur at a very specific point in time. But it's been really helpful for us to understand what it is that's been causing those warnings. And I'm going to share with you some examples of things that we've done to mitigate that and hopefully bring those numbers down moving forward. This chart here is the Airbus data for alpha floor events. Surprisingly, the leading fleet on the Airbus side for alpha floor warnings has been the A350. And that was surprising because it's the biggest, it's the largest, it's the most technologically advanced aircraft that we have. And yet the rate basis is higher than any other Airbus fleet. And so that's been an opportunity for us to look at that aircraft and look at the way that we operate it and say, hey, do we need to make changes? And there have been some changes that we've made, and I think they're effective. All right, moving on from there, the relationship between upsets and automation is really, really important. And I understand that we have different airlines and different corporate operators and private operators all around the world that have different ways of flying the aircraft. But one of the things that I think is absolutely essential as an airline instructor who's been working with thousands of pilots over many years is I think it is absolutely essential that we maintain our hand flying skills, that manual flight be something that we train and something that we encourage in the aircraft as well under certain prescribed conditions. The high pitch events that you see there on the left side of your screen almost exclusively occurred with the autopilot off. It was pilots who were either distracted or following automation that was giving them data that they should not be following. The high bank angle and the low pitch events, we're going to talk a little bit more about those in a minute, but absolutely essential that we maintain our hand flying skills. Okay, this next chart here shows the percentage of the time that the autopilot was off during a high bank exceedance. So if I exceed 45 degrees of bank with the aircraft, this is the percentage of time that that occurred with the autopilot off. These are really high percentages. In some cases, it was 100% of the exceedances occurred with the autopilot off. So on one hand, you could say, well, we need to use the automation. On the other hand, we really need to maintain proficiency, because if I get an aircraft upset or I have an aircraft that's lost control, I need to be able to manually get that aircraft back into the normal flight envelope very quickly and very proficiently. There's several reasons for why these numbers are so high. One of them is proficiency. One of them is distraction. And so that brings up a point. Anytime a pilot at Delta goes heads down, we're supposed to tell the other pilot that I'm going heads down, whether it's to read a chart or to type in the FMS or to look up a piece of paperwork, whatever it is. And that raises the awareness of the other pilot to continually monitor the flight path. But again, hand flying skills are really, really essential. Okay, I'm going to give you some specific examples of where some of these upsets occurred and some common denominators that we've noticed. And some things that we've done to hopefully mitigate against that. So on the 757, this was absolutely the leading aircraft when it came to nose-high exceedances. On one hand, it's an incredibly powerful, incredibly capable aircraft. On the other hand, if you don't effectively manage the energy of that aircraft and manage the automation, it can lead to an upset. So one of the things that we saw when we looked at that data was 99.5% occurred during the initial climb, and 95% of those were above 500 AGL. So what we determined was one causal factor is pilots were rotating too slowly. And as they began to rotate too slowly on the 757, that flight director would lead them to a very nose-high attitude in order to get the airspeed back to either V2 plus 15 to V2 plus 25. And so one of the things that we've done in training is identify that automation issue. But secondly, I've proposed a change to our publications that recommends that even if the automation is taking you above 20 degrees nose up, that the pilots stop at 20 degrees nose up and wait for that automation to settle down. Now, obviously, there's some caveats if ground contact were imminent or something else like that. But under normal operations, we would not want the pilot to exceed these really high pitch attitudes. The autopilot was off in all but one of those events. So again, just highlighting the need for manual hand flying proficiency. Nose low. This one was actually a bit of a surprise to us. So when we looked at the FOQA data, the Airbus 320 fleet, this includes the A319, 320, and 321, but the A320 fleet was the leading fleet for nose low events. In fact, 76% of all nose low events occurred on this fleet. And what was surprising was, one, that fleet was an outlier so far, but that 65% of those occurred with the autopilot engaged. And so that was an opportunity to go back to our instructors and go back to our line check airmen and to our subject matter experts and try to determine what the causal factors were. And I'm not an Airbus pilot. I'm a Boeing 7576 instructor. So I won't pretend to get into all the details. But one thing that we noticed, one thing that came out of the data as we were talking to the experts, was that it was often when the aircraft was high on the path for an initial descent, and the automation began to chase the speed in order to get the path back under control. And in some cases, it would exceed really nose low attitudes. So even though automation is great, there are times that it needs to be managed very, very carefully, and that there are times when the automation needs to be disconnected and the pilot needs to take manual control. Okay, two more examples here. The first is on the 767. I mentioned this earlier. It was the leading cause of stall warnings on the Boeing fleet, and specifically the 76300. And when we looked really closely at the data, what we determined was that at one point, the 76300 accounted for 51% of the stall warnings at Delta. That fleet only makes up 4% of the entire Delta fleet. And so when you have 4% of the fleet that's causing 51% of the warnings, that was a really startling number. And then we looked a little closer at the data and we determined that not only did it account for that high percentage, but it occurred almost 75% of the time between flaps 1 and flaps up on the flap retraction phase after takeoff. That is an incredibly specific period of time that lasts, 10 to 15 seconds after takeoff. And so one of the things that we've done is we have asked Delta to upgrade the flight decks to electronic flight displays. So we're going to take the old manual airspeed indicators, and we're going to keep those, but we're going to upgrade the flight decks so we also have speed tapes available, so the pilots can see their proximity to stall warning as those flaps are being retracted. And just quite honestly, the awareness that the pilots have that that's such a high threat period of time in the flight, if we can get all hands on deck and everybody paying attention to the maneuvering speeds and the air speeds and the flap retraction speeds, that's a win for us. Okay, the A350 is the second example that I want to share here. And I'm going to talk again about this at the end, but the A350, if you'll remember, was the leading Airbus fleet for alpha floor warnings. And one of the things that we determined was that it's temperature sensitive at higher altitudes than we initially thought. And so we've offered some guidance to our pilots on that, and I'll share that with you at the end. All right, so threat mitigation. All this data that we have, that's great, but how do we use that? So I'm going to give you some examples here of how we mitigate those threats in the academic world when we're sharing this information with our pilots. So the example you see there on the left is just an old style airspeed indicator. This is what is currently on our 7576 fleet that's going to be updated. And what I'll do when I'm taking a pilot, particularly through initial training, is I'll show them this airspeed indicator. And I realize it may be a little hard to read on your screen, but I'll just give you the numbers. At a given weight, that particular airspeed indicator that you're looking at, that aircraft has a 1G stall speed of approximately 200 knots. And so I'll take the pilot through the progression on that airspeed indicator and say, okay, if I increase my bank angle to say 30 degrees, this is how much the stall speed increases on that airspeed indicator. Or if I roll it over to 60 degrees of bank, or if I get a wake turbulence event and try to put 2.5 Gs of airplane G on that wing, how much that changes the stall speed. And I can change the stall speed of that aircraft with the angle of attack and with the G load anywhere from 200 knots to almost 290 knots before I exceed the load limit of that wing. But I wouldn't be able to tell that looking at the airspeed indicator, because all I see is the speeds. I don't see any speed tape information at all. But if I increase the G load, immediately I get into stick shaker if I'm not careful. So we'll walk the pilot through those numbers and help them understand how much margin they have on that wing. With the flaps and slats, the one there in the center column, we'll talk about the relationship between flaps and slats and how that changes the angle of attack and how it changes the chord line. On the 76300, when I retract the flaps from flaps 1 to flaps up, I lose almost 30% of my margin to stall warning, my margin to critical angle of attack when I do that. And right at that point in time when the slats are retracting and I'm losing 30% of my margin, that is the precise point at which the pitch limit indicator on that airspeed indicator or on the PFD disappears. And that's my only visual indication of my stick shaker, of my stall warning. And so another one of the upgrades that we're doing is we're adding an enhanced stall warning computer to all of the 76300 aircraft at Delta, and that's going to give us a full-time PLI display. On the right side of your screen right there, just knowing your limits, we put these charts into the flight crew training manual, and so our pilots can see at 15 degrees of bank or at 2 Gs what their increase in stall speed is or what the margin is that they have to maneuvering speed. And I won't read those charts for you, but we've provided them to our pilots in all the training manuals. The display that you see there on the left, that's going to be the new display on the 7576 and just a host of information that's going to be available to the pilot that was not available on that airspeed indicator that we were just talking about. In the center there, as I mentioned, we have 2 subject matter experts on every fleet at all times. They go out to APS in Arizona and they spend a week flying with the team out there, going through academics and going through on-aircraft training, and then eventually delivering UPRT under supervision on the simulator until they get fully checked out as a UPRT instructor at Delta, and then they train the other instructors at Delta. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we take the FOQA data and ASAP data and subject matter experts and deliver FOQA-based training scenarios in initial training, upgrade training, recurrent training, what have you. All right, as we're looking to wrap up here, I want to share some tools for improvement that we are currently using at Delta and some things that we're looking ahead to in our operation. So one of the tools that we currently use, and I think this is really essential, is an application that Delta uses called Widget Weather. And it gives type-specific forecast turbulence at all altitudes. It also gives the current turbulence report from all the aircraft that are operating in the system. It gives cloud tops all around the world, and then also composite radar. And so when I'm looking at the altitude capability of the aircraft, for instance, and I'm saying that I'm getting within, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 feet of the maximum altitude capability of that aircraft on that day, I'm looking very closely at this widget weather application, and I'm seeing what the forecast turbulence is ahead, and I'm looking at what the existing turbulence reports are on the aircraft around me to decide, do I really want to push this aircraft any closer to the maximum capability? Because in some cases, I might only have 1.3 G capability until I get into a stick shaker at max cruise, and I don't want to do that. And so I'm very carefully using this application to mitigate that risk and mitigate the threat, and consider actually flying at a lower altitude to increase the margin for the airspeed capability and the G capability. The second application that we're using online is called Flight Pulse. And what this does is this gives a personalized flight history to every single pilot at Delta. So at any given time, I can pull up Flight Pulse and I can see, have I had any unstable events? What level of automation was I using at a given point in the flight? It keeps a record of manual flight time. So I know down to the second how many minutes and how many seconds I average flying on any given leg. And then it gives me the aggregate data and shows me how I compare to the other pilots at Delta. So I might have an average hand flying time of 5 minutes on any given flight, and another pilot may have 10, or the average might be 20 minutes across the airline. And I'm kind of making up numbers there, but it gives me an opportunity to compare myself to my peers and say, hey, maybe I should think about hand flying a little bit more, or hey, it looks like I've had some unstable approaches in the last 6 months. What could I have done to prevent that from occurring, and what can I do differently in the future to improve? So I think that's a really important application. This chart right here, I won't decipher all the numbers for you, but this is a chart that we provided to our Airbus 350 pilots after some high altitude alpha warning events that we had. And basically what it shows them is the altitude degradation based on an increase in temperature. So if you're flying around the equator and your ISA temperature begins to increase, how does that affect the altitude capability of the airplane? So if you have ISA plus 10 to 15, that reduces the altitude capability by 100 feet per degree Celsius. But if I start getting into really warm waters and really warm temperatures, that actually increases or reduces my altitude capability by 1,000 feet per degree of Celsius above ISA 15. Another reminder we put out to our pilots is that the altitude penalties that are associated with MELs need to be manually applied. That ended up being a causal factor in one of the events that we had. So anyway, these are just multiple ways that we have given our pilots to mitigate risk and mitigate threats on the operation. All right. Lastly here is a topic that has been circling in the industry for the last few years, and it's a topic we call loss of margin go around. And it doesn't fit into the traditional loss of control parameters of the 25 degrees nose up, 10 degrees nose down, 45 degrees of bank. Sometimes it does, but not always. It may be a go around that was initiated but didn't actually result in a climb within a specified period of time, or the configuration wasn't changed in an appropriate period of time, or perhaps ground contact became imminent for some reason. And so we're in the process of analyzing approximately 9,000 go-arounds that have occurred online, 75,000 go-arounds that have occurred in training. And then we're also looking at the qual standards that we train our pilots to, and trying to identify ways that we can train go-arounds better, but also execute them more safely online. So we haven't gotten to the bottom of that study yet, but we are in process of doing that now, and I think that's something that's going to be an important topic for the UPRT community moving forward. So as I wrap up here, there's kind of three key takeaways. First is analyze the data in your operation. Secondly is raise the bar in flight training. Use that data to train your pilots to proficiency. And then ultimately apply those skills and apply that knowledge that you've learned in training and share that on the line. And at the end of the day, if you're an instructor, whether you're a UPRT instructor or a line instructor, make sure that you are comfortable putting your own family on that airplane before you put them out there to the line. Ultimately, that's the standard at Delta. We have very objective training criteria, but at the end of the day, that's what I ask myself. Would I put my own wife and kids on that family before I send that pilot out the door? So thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I'm sorry that I can't take your questions live, but Randy, I see you're joining me now and would love to answer questions that you may have.
Brian, that was a powerful presentation with a lot of data. I want to hone in on one particular nugget because there was so much information that you provided that was valuable information. But let me get this straight. You said that in 5 million operations measured over a 5-year period at Delta Airlines since 2018, they had a 50% reduction in precursor events after the introduction of upset prevention and recovery training?
That is correct. We began upset recovery training, prevention and recovery training in 2018 and simultaneously began tracking the data. And we've seen almost a 50% reduction over that 5-year period. Yes, sir.
Well, Brian, I just want to congratulate Delta Airlines for sharing this information to help make the industry more safe. I want to thank you for your participation, and I hope that you're able to make contributions over on the other side of the world when we're doing our summit. Thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you, Randy. I appreciate it.